Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Copper Club podcast, the first of 2025. So, Happy New Year to all our listeners. We've taken a well-earned break after a long old slog of a season. Jess joined me to review the Brazilian season last in December now. So, it's been 3 or 4 weeks since our last episode, but we're back. The transfers are now rolling in. There's plenty of rumours, but loads of signings in South America as well. So, Jess has returned to help me go through all these particular signings and we'll talk through them. So, look, Jess, Happy New Year. Welcome back to the podcast.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year to everyone that's listening. It's just a joy to be here and talking with you. You know how much I adore you and respect your views. So it's always fun to talk about anything relating to South American football. So I'm excited.
Absolutely. And look, there's been limited activity to Europe, but we'll talk through a few reasons rather as to why that is. Sorry, my voice is very croaky. I was at the Forest-Liverpool game last night, and I won't talk about that as a match review, but I will talk about Murillo just for 20 to 30 seconds, because, Jessica, you must be buzzing from a Brazilian point of view. What a performance from Murillo last night, and all season, really. I think it's worth just flagging because he's just going to be the next best Brazilian centre-back if he isn't already, and I can't wait to see him actually in a Brazilian shirt. It must be close now, but it was just a masterclass last night in terms of defending, and also he even had a ridiculous shot from like 20, 25 yards as well, which I swear was going in at one point. And each and every week he is getting better and better, and I'm very excited to see him in a Brazilian shirt. So I'll keep it short and sweet, but Jess, like, you must be really excited about this player. He's so good, so good.
Yeah, I love him. I think he's fantastic on the ball. He has grown so much, I think, throughout the season. And you know how much of a fan of his I am, and how angry I was that he kept being overlooked for the Brazilian national team. And he kept, the managers kept calling names that were past it, in my opinion, or just not the right fit. So it's wonderful to see him thriving and to see him in a team that's settled, right? So it's not fighting for relegation, it's fighting for bigger things, and the environment is right, and he feels confident, and I mean everyone in that team feels confident, and the manager trusts him, and he's just blossoming, and he's so young too, right? So you just keep wondering, okay, how far and how high can he go? And it's been great to watch.
Yes, definitely. I mean, hopefully Forest get Champions League and he stays, but look, that's not up to me. But let's talk about another centre-back who is on the move. Look, Murillo only had half a season at senior football with the Corinthians before moving across to Nottingham Forest. And now it's Palmeiras' 18-year-old Vitor Reis, who's moving across to Manchester City for just shy of 30 million. I think £29.7 million deal. Not many of our listeners or not many people from a European point of view, especially Man City fans, would know too much about Vitor Reis. But for those close to the Brazilian game, he's almost been the Murillo of last season in terms of he had a half season, made his debut around June, July, and hasn't looked back really. And he's been so impressive in his first 20, I think 24 games across all competitions he played. Jess, so I'll hand the microphone over to you before we dive into his profile a little bit and before we talk about that Man City move. But it did feel inevitable a big club was going to be looking at him. And I think a lot of teams have maybe seen how well Murillo did with Forest and want to make sure that they grab the next best centre-back. Have Man City grabbed the next best centre-back out of Brazil?
I think so. Yes, I think he has been the biggest name in defense. I think he is regarded as better than Murillo actually here in Brazil in terms of the academy and how highly he is seen with people that follow youth, because obviously he's very young. I think he just turned 19. So, but he has been like a constant throughout, the ranks of the youth academy. And when he broke through, it's been just a question about not of if, but when a big European club would come. There were clear games where you even saw scouts from other teams. I think Liverpool were a club that was following him very closely. So yeah, he is highly rated. I think within Brazil, he is the next big thing, or at least he is touted to be the next big thing. I don't know if you want me to talk about his strengths or
yeah, well, look, it's the first podcast back. We can't start with weaknesses and negatives. So let's lead with his strengths and what Man City fans can expect to see.
Strengthfully, in the air, he is a beast, an absolute beast. Great at duels, scanning, fantastic with scanning. His passing is good. And now it's in my opinion like the weakness, but also a strength is he is overly aggressive. So the thing that I see is a weakness. Obviously, sometimes he goes in too soon, and I think that's the one thing that he needs to work on. But at the same time, he has the vision and the anticipation, right? So that's one characteristic that he always has. He views things before others. And I say that time and time again for center backs. That is my favorite quality to see in a center back, is someone that knows what's going to happen before it happens. Sometimes even before, you realize what the attacker is going to do, he already anticipated. So he has that. But he needs to just dial back with the aggression and just the timing of, going forth. And if you can work on that, then it's going to be incredible, because I think it's something that it's very workable on, and that we've seen, I think, even with Manchester City with Gabriel as well, working on that under Pep Guardiola. So I think it can work. Right? He has played both. He has played left center back and right center back, but his preference on the right is where he is best. Where he's best at. He's also played right back, so he has that fluidity that just allows him to be the perfect fit, I think, for Pep Guardiola. But when you put together vision, anticipation, his passing ability, which I will say is something that he needs to work on in terms of the line break passes. He needs to do more of those. It's not that he doesn't have the capacity. He absolutely has that, but he just needs to have that incentive of, trying them more and more, which is obviously something that you're going to see under Pep Guardiola. It's just how he plays. And yeah, I mean, fantastic potential player to have. He has surprised a lot of people, I think, in just the short amount of time that it took for him to really settle as just the big name in defense. Right. So he came from being like a youth academy player to just first name on in the sheet if you're talking about defense. So I mean, I think that's impressive. Also, I mean, he's coming from Brazil, so he's very lengthy, thin, only 19, so he needs to build up with the physicality. But even then, when you're talking about the weaknesses, I'm just being very picky, and also, talking about things that are very easily to work on. Because when you're looking at the raw attributes and the characteristics that you want in a centre back, he has all of them.
Yeah, definitely. I think his intelligence and calm aura sort of screams towards City how comfortable he is on the ball. And I know you said there you wanted to see him play more line breaking passes, but as a 17, 18-year-old coming in at centre back, and Palmeiras are a big side in Brazil, which people may not know too much from the outside. Looking into Brazilian football, but when you've got players like Rafael Veiga in front, sometimes it's easier just to go side to side or just pass it to him to almost be like, this is my job. But I think even in that 20-25 games he's played, we've seen him sort of grow in confidence. And just to sort of back it up with some stats, I was having a bit of a deep dive before we came to the podcast. And his long ball passing percentages, his ground duels and aerial duels. Yes, it's a small sample size of 20-25 games, but they were better than Lucas Beraldo when he was at Sao Paulo before moving to PSG, and Murillo's at Corinthians before moving across to Forest. So I know the first thing you said there was he's more highly rated than Murillo coming out of Brazil, and some people could be like, whoa, but his stats back that up. And even when you touched on a weakness there, saying he's tall, lanky, but quite fragile. He looks quite fragile, but his first full 90 minutes debut was against Corinthians, Palmeiras' arch rivals.
And he knows how to use his body.
Yeah. So I think the fact that his aerial duels, his percentage was so high last season. Yes, Palmeiras is one of the better teams, but they still struggled in certain games. But he never looked out of his depth. And you think about Palmeiras, got Gustavo Gomez and the other Murillo, two solid centre backs there. But he never really looked back. His position was never dropped since coming in. And Abel Ferreira is normally a manager who, as we saw with Esteval first and Endrick the season before, he likes to wrap them in cotton wool a little bit. But with Vitor Reis, he was happy just to sort of almost throw him in the deep end. And he just coped from the very beginning and scored against Flamengo in the Cup, Corinthians on his debut. So he has it in the other box as well, which is what Man City need at times with, at the moment, Ruben Diaz is out injured. John Stones, we don't know what's going to happen with his future. And as soon as I saw John Stones when I was going through Man City centre-backs, because obviously he's been injured and not seen him in a while, I know people always want comparisons and I hate it. But he reminds me of John Stones, maybe because of his stature. John Stones doesn't look He's not a big, stocky player, but he's very good in the air, but also good at bringing the ball out. And as part of this Man City rebuild, they need to have a confident player who's going to be there for the next 5-10 years, right? That's going to be the idea of this project now. And it's quite exciting looking at Man City's project now. I know they've dominated football, but this transition period is going to be really interesting. But they've targeted the right profile here. And if they can get him in, learning under those players we've listed there, they could have a top centre back here for the next 5-6 years. And I really agree with you there. Working under Pep is going to be exciting. I know Pep hasn't been his usual self this season. He's been more around the memes around what's going on with him. But under Pep, obviously, still one of the best managers in the world, and how he wants his centre backs to set up and be such a big part of how City go forward, and wants them to dominate the ball. But also, if we look back over the last 2-3 years, when City have lost possession or if they've struggled in games which they should be winning, and teams have got them on the counter attack, it's often been left with one or two centre backs who have been trusted with breaks against outnumbered. And that's where I want to bring up Rice's intelligence with his positioning. Yes, I agree with you. He can be quite rash with how he dives in at players. But when he stands up and just where he positions himself, because Palmeiras, it's a similar situation, right? They dominate most games and have to know how to deal with players on the counter. Yes, you're going from Palmeiras to the Premier League and to Man City. It's a big jump. But it's very similar, isn't it, in terms of how his responsibility will lie. So I don't think it's going to be a massive adjustment period as people would expect, because it's very similar size in terms of dominating the ball and how they're setting up and what they have to deal with on the counter attack. And all of that within £30 million in today's market, it could be a really, really solid deal. And yeah, I'm like you. I didn't know Liverpool were looking, but I heard the links of like Barcelona, Real Madrid. So it was expected that all these big clubs were looking. But Man City have come out and made a really early statement, and it came out of nowhere. And they're looking in the right area because Brighton were there. And if Brighton are sometimes looking at these players, we know how well they work in this space, right? So it can be quite frustrating. But look, Brighton didn't get their man this time, and he's off to Man City. So how do you see it? I mean, I'm quite a fan of the move. I think it's going to work really well, but it's all part of it. He's coming in at a good time, isn't he? Because yes, City have dropped off, but it's all about this rebuild, and he's going to be at the heart of that.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I'm not going to pretend I follow closely like the plans with Man City in terms of whether or not they're going to try to loan him or go to one of the clubs that under the City umbrella. What the plan is with him, but under the assumption that he's going to go to Manchester City and work under Pep Guardiola, it's really exciting to me because I really feel he has the characteristics of a center back that would do incredibly well under Pep. And as I said, he can play right back as well, so he can be he is if you try to picture what a center back under Pep would look like in terms of attributes, it's him. So it makes me excited for his future, and I really want it to work out. I really, as a Brazilian, obviously, I really want to see what Pep does with him. And as you said, his positioning is great. And the thing with the aggression for me, it's just because of the anticipation. He knows what's going to happen, and he just needs to have that person to teach him when to jump or not to jump. And that's something that you can work on fairly easy. And I'm confident it can be ironed out, within his game. So yeah, I'm just happy. I think in theory is a move that suits everyone, to be quite honest.
Yeah, and we're quite honest on this podcast. We don't just sit here like nodding dogs and say yes to every single move, but it does seem like a nice fit. So we'll have to keep an eye on it. Like you said, a low move might happen, but we don't know what Man City's plans are. We're just talking long term because obviously Man City want him to start at centre back at some point. But a very good pickup, 29.7 million is quite a good deal in this particular day and age. This transfer window has been all about young defenders, really. We're starting from the back. There's no exciting wingers as of yet who have moved across. But there is a left back to get excited about who is heading to the south coast in Julio Soler from Lanus. 19-year-old left back is moving to Bournemouth, or has moved to Bournemouth, already played his debut in the FA Cup. I haven't seen that. I will need to go back and check how he got on. But £6.6 million move. Looks really good, to be honest with you, this particular one. First flagged by Albert Hilton, our Argentinian expert, in a Defenders 5 to Watch article around a year ago, and kept close an eye on him. And I think what I was a little bit hesitant of first was, Valentin Barker came across to Brighton and we made such a big song and dance about him. And now he went to Seville. He didn't particularly set the world alight there. I even watched him live against Bilbao and he was hooked at half time. So every time these Argentinian players come across, I was like, did I read that right? But I think for me, Valentin Barco, without going on a tangent here, is going to be better in a more central midfield role because he doesn't have that stature or that size. Now, if you look at Soler, he's also a small player, but he has a lot more. I don't know. For me, he's a natural left back. He has a bit more bite about him. The way he drives forward, the way in which he can hold the ball up. Just even when he's got his back to goal, he wants to be able to turn a play and get forward. So there's a lot of concerns in and around his sort of aerial presence because people are always looking for certain weaknesses when they're coming across to the Premier League because defenders are going to be more exposed coming to this particular league at first. But his ground duels, his percentage rate was really high for Lanus last season. And for me, because he's that natural left back, he could be looking long term as this move to Bournemouth. I don't think he would have gone there if he didn't think he was going to get regular game time because there's a left back position for Argentina's national team at the moment. That's their one spot where they're really struggling in the full back area. So at first, when the deal was done, I was like, is he going to get played? Because I was looking at Valentin Barco, but they're very different profiles. I don't think Barco is a long-term left back. I just wanted to get that in there. I've gone on a tangent about someone else because he might be. I think there was rumours with him with Porto, which was quite surprising. But look, let's stick with Soler before we start talking about every other left back. Jess, what are your initial thoughts on the move?
I would just say one thing first. You know, when you're talking about young players, there are, and I say that again and again, it's not cut and dry. There are a lot of circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've seen like now with Botafogo, a player goes to Europe, it doesn't work, they come back and then they go again, and it doesn't work in one environment, but it works in the other. So it's a lot to do with culture and the timing, and every player matures different. So it's always tricky when you're talking about a young player. It doesn't take away from the fact that they are a good player or they were a good player, but you know, there are so many factors go into this. So you know, I'm not, you know, Bajo was seen, and I think still is seen as a good prospect. You know, maybe under the right environment, he can thrive because he has good characteristics. And the move to Brighton, in theory, it would work. But then for whatever reason, it didn't. So it's just something to, you know, you can never say with certainty with young players, and that's just a fact. So you know, it's always a risk, even for the clubs buying the players, because you don't know exactly how it's going to pay out. But again, looking at this move, I like it. I will put it out there. I have watched him with Lanús because he played Cruzeiro in Sul-Americana, so I watched that. I have watched him, and I've watched him for Argentina, the under-20s, and I believe under U23s, I think, but I haven't really followed Lanús as the, you know, in the league or as a club. So my knowledge of him is very limited. What I will say is that I really liked the move from Bournemouth's perspective, because I think we're going to see movement in the left back area in the summer. There are a lot of clubs circling, if you're talking about Carcass. So, you know, I think they were very smart, because it gives them the time to check out this player, see how he does, bat him in with everybody, and then be in a much more comfortable position going forward if a big club does come in for their player, because there have been a lot of rumors about Liverpool and whatnot. So so I think it is a really good move. I like him. The only problem, as you mentioned, for me, like on the back, has been the height. I think he's 170 something, so it's not like the tallest, but he is highly rated here, and he was very impressive against Cruzeiro. I will say that. I remember after that game, if you go like on Twitter, and Brazilian fans were just talking about, oh my God, that guy was. And I think it was 1-1 game, but he caught the eye of everybody that was watching. So obviously there is a player there to talk about. I will have to read the analysis that you guys did on him, because I missed that. So that'll be interesting to read and know more about him.
Yeah, definitely. And we had Bournemouth's South American scout, Fran Lorenzo, come onto the podcast. And obviously this was way before the deal, but he gave insight as to how his mind works. And he said he always looks... Well, it's funny because before I spoke to him, and obviously every scout is different, but he said that instead of looking at the positives of a player, I always look at the negatives first to see if there are any before recommending players. And he played a big part in the deal. So if you haven't checked out that episode and you want to know a little bit more about how they actually operate, and especially now diving into South America, do tune into the previous episode across Apple, Spotify, and also YouTube. But Soler, a nice deal. Rice, a nice deal. Defenders, we haven't had any exciting wingers or forwards come across yet, but we want to bring a couple of players to the table who we like, who may be on the move this window, probably more so in the next 6 to 12 months. And Jess, I'm going to hand the microphone over to you. You can kickstart here because, of course, we're returning to Corinthians because they just keep on producing top quality youngsters. So who do you want to talk about?
Yeah, I when you asked me to, pick someone that I thought could go to Europe, that I would like to see in Europe, the thought came about Breno Bidon. He has been outstanding for Corinthians, and we've just seen Wesley go to Saudi right now. Also a young player, but the reason I mentioned him was because there was this big like Gazeta did like an interview with Corinthians fans and who they thought the young player, the best young player was, and it was like Bidon throughout the board. And we saw Wesley leave, but it was because he just kind of mashed the midfield together. We call in Brazil we call his position segundo volante, which means like the second midfielder, which means that he is not a defensive midfielder, but more of a orchestrated type of midfielder. He has the technique. And for me, what's interesting about him and what I like when I watch him is that usually when you think about Brazilian midfielders, or at least what we have been seeing, you see the defensive midfielders and you just see players that like the flair or like to dribble. And it's so, it's once in a blue moon, you get kind of like a Spanish midfielder, if that makes sense. Someone who's more like a controller and more about the vision and the passing instead of the dribbling. And he has that to a T. So it's very exciting. Again, the big downside for him is that he is short. He is not very physical. But when you pair him to a good bulky first, primeiro volante, which is like a defensive midfielder that allows him to have that time and space to roam, the passes that he picks, it's just outstanding for such a young player. He's been incredibly impressive throughout the Brasileirão, especially by the end of last seasons. And so there has been a lot of interest. Barcelona would be the perfect fit for him, but at the same time, they already have a lot of players with his qualities. But they have been following him. A lot of Premier League clubs have been linked with him. Bayern Munich was linked with him once in a blue moon, so I don't know what's going to happen. I actually would like to see him playing Brasileirão again this season. I think it would be good for his development, but I would not be surprised if he were to go, because Corinthians need the money, and his attributes are great to watch. He's just a joy to watch, and it's like, it's that term. We have a term here. I don't know if you have it in English, but literally it would be he plays wearing a suit. That's
I like that. Yeah.
It's
That's nice.
So it's the feeling that we have when we watch him play, and it's just so exciting. And I remember that I said to you when I said I would mention him specifically because I think he is I think I wouldn't say it's like, but there's a huge chance. I would say that there is a big chance that he's on the move either now or in July. But one player that I would like to mention, just for people that are listening and want to know more about the player, just keep an eye out for him, is Gabriel Mack. He is, now he is the like 100% Brazilian style player that you think about. He has the flair of the flair. Winger, fantastic, can go midfield, but different types of players, just younger, a lot younger. He's just now going to be part of the senior team this season for Gremio. So look out for him. Chelsea were linked, I think, last summer with him, but nothing came of it. It's going to be interesting to see how he does in his senior, but he's just a joyful player to watch. I'm just so excited to see what he does this season, because if you think Neymar has flair and is like what you would define a flary player, he is a lot more he has a lot more flair in him than Neymar, in the sense of he beats his man, he comes back, he beats him again, and then he comes back and does it again. It's just like, that meme of like, it's enough, stop doing. That's Gabriel Mack for him. So it's just someone to keep an eye out as well for anyone that's listening. I think you would I mean, I don't know if he's gonna, develop in the right way, but just someone fun to watch.
Yeah, I'm just looking on my phone here because this isn't the first time. Of course, it's not the first time it's been brought up on this podcast. But if people want to know a little bit more, I sat down with Peter Pankowski and Callum Goodall, and we spoke about him in more detail in Series 3, Episode 18. So, yeah, look, Jess isn't the only one who's getting excited about him, but the way you described him there, I think that was perfect. I do want to quickly touch on Bidon because there's a couple of things I've noticed. When you said you wanted to talk about him on the podcast, obviously I've watched him extensively this season, but I wanted to see a little bit more about his youth game. And you said there in terms of where he sits as, well, not a defensive midfielder, but for the senior team, he's taking that sort of more defensive role on. Now, for youth level, I just saw him scoring goal after goal, and that's very similar to Gabriel Moscardo, who's gone to PSG. When he was a youth player also for Corinthians, he played in a higher role at youth level, and then when he came to the senior team, they sort of brought him back into a hybrid number 6 role, and then that's what we're seeing with Bidon this time. But do you know what, this is a really big claim, and I don't like doing these things on podcasts just for the sake of it, but as you brought up his passing and the weight of his passing, his style, do you know the first player who comes to mind when I think about him is Mesut Ozil, the way he drops the balls in, and I'm not saying he is that level, okay?
No,
It was the
I'm laughing because
style.
I know I'm laughing because I know people are gonna go crazy.
I know.
Because
It's
of
the
so
style
that's why I
though.
laugh.
That's what I'm going with. I'm not
Um,
saying he's Mesut Ozil or like that sort of
yeah,
player, but his weighted
I
passes and the way
remember.
he sees
Yeah,
it, it's that sort
I
of. It was that
remember.
player. You see where I'm coming
I
from,
remember.
or have I gone over the top
Yeah,
there?
no, I get it. I think the first I remember when the first time that I watched him closely, I was reminded of Thiago Alcantara, who at Bayern Munich, he was the one that or maybe like to be very close to the recent years, Enzo Fernandez, but the way he plays for Argentina, like a little bit deeper, but not with the defensive attributes, which is something that he has been working on his game, but more about, okay, your job is to do the tempo and peak the passes, and it's gonna tick. You're gonna make the
Yeah,
everything tick in midfield. So
yeah.
in that sense, yeah.
Yeah, a lot more defensive than Mesut Ozil. I'm not going to be saying he's playing for Real Madrid and all these
No,
assists and
no,
stats,
no.
but the style was just. I'm a bit of a
Yeah.
sucker for the weighted pass and how sort of elegant he is. When you said they obviously what they say in Brazil in terms of wearing a suit, I think that just sums it up
Yeah.
perfectly. So hopefully people see where we're coming from here and we're not overhyping him. But yeah, a lot of talk around him. The last player I just want to bring to the table for a couple of minutes is Flamengo's Lorran, who I well, I sent a tweet to you earlier today, didn't I, Jess?
Yeah.
That there was high hopes for him. A lot of links last season. He was playing under Chichi in the first team, 20 plus appearances. It was meant to be his big breakout year. I would personally say I had a better vibe from him than Mateus Franco, who went to Crystal Palace for 25 million. And then all of a sudden, once Chichi was gone and Felipe Luis came in as manager, he drops into the reserves or the youth team, hasn't really got back in. And CSK Moscow were bidding 4 or 5 million today. I'm not sure how legit that is, but that is some fall considering. I mean, we've made plenty of hype of him on the podcast and I've been
Mm-hmm.
very excited about him. And I feel like he's he's not a winger. I think he's better sort of as that number 10 role, but he can operate in that space. But Mateus Franca gets the opportunity to go to Palace for 25 million when he still didn't know exactly what his position was and hadn't really convinced in front of goal. And then Lorran is being shipped to Russia for a fifth of the price. That doesn't make sense to me. It's
Yeah.
quite frustrating to see those links. I don't know what you think, Jess.
Yeah, Lohan was someone that I followed closely from the youth stage just because it's so easy to follow someone that catches eye, that plays in a way that it's like eye catching. So I think it's easier. So he is that type of player. So it's normal, I think, to for everybody to just. And when he was doing good, he was doing great. Like the way he was playing with joy, and it's what Brazilians like to see. As I agree with you, I like him more like in the inside forward, second striker, not as a touchline winger,
Mm.
but he is exciting to watch. And I was actually talking with a Flamengo fan today about him, and they were so against selling him now just because he is still highly rated within Flamengo. He was telling me that in terms of their academy setup and everybody within the club still see him with big potential as a player that, and now he is at the lowest in terms of the revenue and the value that they could get for him. So he, as a fan, was absolutely against selling him now, both because of the value aspect, but also because in his eyes, he can actually contribute to the season and maybe bring him back to his best. So I think for him now, it would be best to stay. I wouldn't want to go, because sometimes you see those players moving to Russia now, to Saudi, and it's nothing against those leagues, but it's like you don't hear about them anymore, and their development are stunned, and usually it's by the time they get back to then build again, it happens, but it's not the norm. And so it's not everybody is like Hulk, right, who goes to Zenit and it's still in headlines and everybody's still talking about him. That's just the reality. So for a young player, it's going to be a bigger risk to choose that. And so we're going to have to wait and see what happens there. But I personally would like for him to stay, get the minutes, build himself up again, because there is definitely a market, in my opinion, in Europe for him.
Of course. And I think mainly because of what's happened in the last few years with the Russia-Ukraine war, there's been less and less spotlight on what's happening in the Russia Premier League from a European point of view, or even Brazilian. And then that's what he said, that these players are going there and no one's got to focus on them. And then Brazil to Russia is a huge culture shock as well, huge difference. And if that doesn't work out and they come back to Brazil, these players can come back a little bit broken. And we've seen it time and time again. So, but one to monitor, highly rate him. I don't understand the Franco Lorran sort of price difference, but I'll leave that one there and park that. Let's finish the podcast with, look, there's not been too much activity yet. I know people will think, well, it's January, clubs don't sell, but this is a time where there's normally a lot of South American players going across to Europe. We haven't seen that too much, obviously the players we've mentioned, but I think it's really important to say how exciting the Brazilian season could be next year in terms of players who are, obviously we had like Memphis Depay move across last year, but if we focus on like teams like Palmeiras and Cruzeiro, who have recruited heavily, Palmeiras are spending so much money at the moment, signing Paulinho from Atletico Mineiro for around 14 million euros, bringing Facundo Torres from Orlando City for 11.5 million. They're trying to sign Fulham's Pereira for around 20-25 million as well. Cruzeiro have just signed Gabriel. Flamengo's Fabrizio Bruno. They tried to sign Vélez's Dudu as well. Yeah, Balassi. They tried to sign Vélez's young centre back as well. So Brazil was becoming appealing. It's almost like, yes, they're losing a lot of youngsters to Saudi, and that could be a long-term problem. We need to monitor that. But big names are coming across to Brazil, and I think that's why we've not seen as many deals this particular window. But it's going to make the league even more intriguing to watch, and Palmeiras' comeback could be really interesting next season. Jess, what's your opinion on this as a Brazilian? Because look, I'm English. I love Brazilian football, and I love talking about the players coming across to Europe. But my heart and soul is with the league, and I love to see it get better and better. And obviously, it's the standout league in South America now. What's your thoughts on this?
I think we are in the moment where the league is getting stronger, as you said, compared to the other leagues in South America. And so one thing that has been growing more and more is the fact that the Brazilian league are looking to other markets within South America. And you did not see that happen before. So you see a lot of people from Argentina, a lot of players from Argentina, from Paraguay, even now from the MLS, obviously coming, usually they're South America, but they were playing the MLS. So it's something that it's growing. And for so long, there was this resistance in Brazil, right? And I kid you not, when I was younger, I used to hear it a lot. The same thing that I now hear for managers. You know, you have the managers, managers of the national team has to be Brazilian. You used to hear pundits talk about the Brazilian leagues and the Brazilian players, and it only works with Brazilian players. And obviously that's not sustainable. And to just see that broaden within, throughout the years and see us go to other markets, it's great because it makes the league stronger. And now you're seeing that with managers as well. You have a lot of managers from Portugal specifically. So it's great for the league, and it creates a much more competitive environment. And as far as for the transfers out, I think it's a mix of things. Right now, what I think the Brazilian league is doing perfectly is mixing up young talent with very senior players. So you are seeing senior players who have been to Europe, or who are a little bit older maybe to perform at the highest level in Europe in the top 5 leagues in the world. They come back and but they're still great. You see now with Oscar coming from China, but not from China, but not only him. You saw it with Paulinho, and you have all those senior players, but at the same time a very a crop of very exciting young players from the academy, and you mix them up, and that's the recipe for, in my opinion, a very strong league. But in terms of transfers out, I think it's a mix of things. One thing I will say is the European countries are coming in for the young prospects very, very early on. So I'll give the example of Stevan, right? So you buy him before he's 18. So you're not going to see him move now or talk about him because he has already been bought. It's just waiting until he turns 18. So I think it's a mixture of that and how the moves happen a lot sooner. And to also the fact that the senior players are obviously not going to be going back to Europe. So it's almost like the European market is going one step before they usually were, right? So usually you would see a lot of movement for Estevão now after the season is finished, but that already happened. Same thing we saw with Endrick. Victor Rios, he just had a few games. Usually what you would see a couple, you would wait until he had a full season and was more established, and then a European market would open and you would see teams battling against each other to get that wonder kid. Right now it's a race of who comes first, right? So it's a lot more risky, but at the same time, if you get it right, then it's like high risk, high rewards type of game. And I think that kind of has a big influence in the way that transfer market goes.
And I'm glad you just touched on Oscar moving back to Brazil. That is exciting. That's what we like to see. So a lot of Europeans might be like, oh, well, these players are towards the end of their career, but Lucas Moura linking up with Oscar is going to be beautiful to watch. And then, like you said, you never know which youngsters are going to come around the corner. They just keep coming onto the scene. Every year we're like, who's going to replace who? And I think that's the most exciting thing. But the fact now there's money in the league, I think it makes it so competitive. And I urge a European audience to get involved with the league when it starts back up, or even taking note of the cup competitions when the first team players start coming back. So look, loads of interesting stuff going on in Brazil. We've covered the transfers for now. We will be back next week if there have been any more transfers. But yes, we've focused on Brazil for this particular episode. But there's been so many deals as the Argentinian league looks to return. River, Boca, and Estudiantes of all teams have been spending a lot of money, have got an interesting situation going on there. So stay tuned for that. But look, our episode is proudly sponsored by Player Stats. Do check them out. There's a 20% discount with this particular episode. It's brilliant to be back. Jess, I'm already itching for March, but it's just round the corner, isn't it? I can't wait for the Brazilian season. But I'm sure there's more transfers, and I'm sure you'll be back on to talk about them. So once again, thank you for returning to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Here I am once again with my Sierra kit.
Love it.
Just talking about Vozão. Can I say what Vozão is?
Of course you can.
Yeah, okay. So for people that don't know, which I think it's the majority, Sierra is my club. We're finally back in the first division, and our mascot is a big grandpa. So that's our nickname. It's like Big Grandpa. And in Portuguese, that's Vozão. So we have the best mascot ever, right? It's a Big Grandpa. How can you not love that? So yes, root for Ceará, and hopefully we can stay in the first division.
We already said that the podcast has adopted your team. We didn't have a team before, but now we have one to definitely root before. But now it sounds like we're Glory supporters. Now you're in the top division.
No, it's like no. Get ready to suffer. It's like, yes, stick with us because it's gonna be a while. At least the fans are great, right? I can say that much. Like the what we do in our stadium, the Castelão, is like in terms of the party, the light, it's just, they're great. The support is fantastic. So, it's great to have you on board, but get ready to suffer. We're gonna pull through, but it's gonna be a bumpy ride.
What a wonderful way to wrap up the podcast. So we'll see you guys next week. Thank you for listening.